Hi, everyone. Happy Tuesday. I think it's Tuesday. My name is Eric Oberstein, and I'm just thrilled and honored to have been invited on Alternative Venues for Jazz by Gail Boyd, who's a dear friend and colleague and someone I have incredible admiration for, someone who's been doing the work in our field for a long time, working with so many incredible artists who I admire. So thank you, Gail, for having me. And just really thrilled to be um on this platform. So many of our dear colleagues have had this platform in the past, and folks I've worked with and people I admire. So just thrilled to be here. Um, I think in half an hour we get to share a little bit about our path in music and in jazz. And I've been really fortunate to wear many hats in my career. Um, I am older than I look. I know I look 12, but I've been doing this for some time, and I can thank my mother for the good Cuban genes, and that will play into Cuba. Will play into my story a little bit later. But I'm speaking to you all from Harlem in New York City. I'm from New York originally, and fortunate to spend my days working as a jazz producer, as an arts administrator, as an educator, and been fortunate to spend my whole life really in love with music. I grew up in New York, actually right on the Queens Nassau County border in Belrose Village. I want to give a shout out to Brian Backus, who um, reached out to me to let me know that he and I have some connections, that he grew up in, I think it was East Elmhurst. My family is from Elmhurst, Queens. My parents met as teenagers, as kids. Um, my mother's family is from Havana, Cuba, and came to New York City in 1961, right after the Cuban Revolution, and ultimately settled in Elmhurst, where she met my dad, who is a Jewish kid from the neighborhood, and they met. But anyway, there's the Elmhurst connection with Brian, and then where I went to high school, Floral Park Memorial High School, just down the road from Brian's high school, Sewanaka High School. So, someone also in the jazz community who I have incredible respect and admiration for. So shout out to Brian. I think he was the one who recommended me to Gail for this. But yeah, I grew up right outside of the city, but always spending time in the city. I think being so close to New York and being around that vibe and that atmosphere was really influential for me, deciding to pursue a career in the arts and a career in music. Um, People always ask me, were your parents musicians? And I say no. They loved music and they played music as kids, but it was not their profession. And my mother's actually a midwife and a professor of midwifery for 30 years at SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn. And my father, a computer programmer. So I guess when you put a midwife and a programmer together, you get a musician. Um, but music was always around. We would go to family parties in Queens at my grandparents' home, and this is on the Cuban side of the family. So my great aunt and uncle would get a DJ for the party, and they would come and spin just all the great Cuban and Latin hits of the day, and also that they grew up with. So before I knew what I was listening to, I was, listening to Celia Cruz and Benny Moré. Benny Moré apparently was a childhood friend of my great uncle Tony. So small world, but giants in the Cuban music world. But then we were also listening, this was, late 80s, early 90s. So we were listening to Juan Luis Guerra. We were listening to Mark Anthony. We were listening to Willie Colon. I think we wore out the cassette of Willie Colon's El Gran Varón when I was a kid. I used to ask for that on car trips. But I found myself sitting at these parties and just drumming on my legs, just drumming along with the music. And there was this rhythm that was inside of me. I didn't exactly know what it meant or what it was, but was always moved by the music. And then in school, we went to public school on Long Island, very supportive, very influential music program and arts program. And I have to lament that that is really the exception in public schools these days, as opposed to the norm. We hear about the golden age of every school having a band program or an art program, and a lot of schools lack those programs now, budget cuts, etc. So I'm just grateful for my teachers, who showed me the way. I ultimately started playing alto sax. My cousin Danny played alto sax, and I looked up to him and I said, I need to play alto sax. Actually, it started on violin the year before, and then switched to sax. And my dad got me a couple CDs, and I was 8 years old. And these two CDs, he handled Charlie Parker and Bird and Diz. So Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie. And on my Walkman, well, I guess it was Discman at the time, would fall asleep in bed listening to Now's the Time. And, so many great tunes on those albums. And I didn't realize it was uncommon, but being an 8-year-old listening to Bird and Diz and just getting so steeped in that music, it was a whole education. And God bless my parents for being patient with me as I honked through those early saxophone lessons. And my older brother is also a musician and works in the arts, but he plays piano and violin. So they were just so supportive of us playing music in the house and going to see concerts and things like that. But I just loved being around that environment and ate it up. I ultimately went on to play in bands in high school. I played in jazz band and marching band, and started a rock band with my friends. And that was a great learning experience, not just about playing music, but being a part of a group, creating something, being a part of something that was bigger than myself, creating community. So I really have so many fond memories as a kid playing music and being around jazz, especially. And not just jazz, but the thing that we like to call Latin jazz. I know folks have all sorts of terms for this music, but it's really the music that I grew up with my family, and that is a part of my identity. And people always say, do the thing that you know, or do the thing that speaks to you, that you could just spend all day doing. And for me, that was my heritage. That was just the music I was growing up around. So I was playing jazz in school, but also hearing Latin music at home, and then learned about this thing called Latin jazz, which I know in our community sometimes can seem like it's this other thing or this thing on the side. I like to think that it's part of the same tree of jazz music. So much of the music came from Africa, of course, that collision of Africa with European influence, commingling in the Caribbean, making its way up through New Orleans and then the rest of the United States, and of course became this incredibly international music from there. But Latin jazz really has become my life and my career, aside from my day job. I like to joke my day job as an arts administrator running arts organizations. I have this side life as a music producer, primarily in Latin jazz. But I would say that I had a really brief but formative experience at the end of high school, where I interned at a recording studio in New York City. It's no longer, but it was called Campo Studios, on Bond Street, in the Village, and between Lafayette and Bowery. They paid me $6 a day. They might as well have called it an unpaid internship, but that was my first time in a recording studio, and that down the road in my story will make sense around the music producing. But just an incredible experience to be around. And ultimately in college, I went to undergrad down in North Carolina at Duke University and joined an Afro-Cuban percussion ensemble in the music department. A big shout out to my mentor, Bradley Simmons, an incredible percussionist specializing in Latin percussion and African percussion, who has taught at Duke for probably 3 decades. And he just invited me so warmly, and I played in that group for years, every Monday night. But that was really my way of connecting with the Cuban side of the music. And then I also played for I think it was a semester, I subbed with the jazz ensemble at Duke on saxophone. So I was playing tenor in the jazz ensemble, and we got to share the stage with Dr. Lonnie Smith, just an incredible artist and memory that I have. We also were on a bill with Roy Haynes and other giants, so special memories from college. And then ultimately in college, I studied cultural anthropology, really ethnomusicology, and wrote a thesis on Cuban music, really looking at Cuban music following the Soviet collapse, which was called the Special Period in Cuba. And of course, Buena Vista Social Club in the late 90s was the thing that everyone knew. And I love that. And I have fond memories of going to the Beacon Theater with my family to see Buena Vista Social Club and, Omar Portuondo, Ibrahim Ferrer, Eliades Ochoa, incredible project. But that, of course, was the music that my grandparents grew up with pre-revolution. I was interested in looking at timba music, which is like salsa, but sort of an aggressive street style that mixes jazz and funk. So I was listening to groups like La Charanga Habanera, NG La Banda, Pupi Los Que Son Son. So really came to love timba. And then Cuban hip hop, just looking at the role that music played on the island, an island that was very much closed off from us as Americans. So I became immersed in that through my thesis. I also spent a semester back home in New York City. Duke had an arts and media program, so I interned at Jazz and Lincoln Center, and I really wanted to go there to see what a world-class arts organization looked like from the inside and how it operated from the inside. And I wasn't quite sure about the career that I was pursuing. I thought, well, maybe I'll be a journalist, maybe I'll do something in music, but I didn't know. And it wasn't until that time that I realized that arts management, arts administration was a viable career path, and have fond memories of on my second day on the job, meeting Wynton Marsalis in the elevator, and Phil Schaap, rest in peace, just a beautiful soul and such tremendous knowledge of this music. And I made the mistake, and folks who know Phil will appreciate this. When he asked me who my favorite jazz artist was, I said Charlie Parker. And then he proceeded to ask me, can you sing bars 16 through 34 of, the 1952 version of Yardbird Suite on Dial? And I was incredibly embarrassed, but we bonded after that experience, and I learned a lot from Phil that semester. Ultimately, I came back to Duke and worked at Duke's Performing Arts Presenting Series, Duke Performances, and just knew this was my path. I love playing music. It's my passion. But you also sometimes in life, that maybe you're not virtuosic in something, or maybe the talents you can bring to this world can help the music in other ways. And I knew that I was an organized kid. I knew that I had a passion for supporting this music, and folks know me from my calm disposition. I guess being calm under fire is what has built me into an arts administrator. But I really think that I've been able to support artists and help them realize their goals and their dreams by sort of having that disposition, bring that sense of order and structure to the process, and then also having that artistic sensibility. So I worked at Duke Performances as a student. I ultimately came back home to New York for grad school at Columbia, studied arts administration, and then I had an experience that changed my life. My brother, who I mentioned earlier, Matthew, was working at Symphony Space on the Upper West Side in their programming department. He got me a ticket to see Arturo O'Farrell and the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra, who had just left Jazz Lincoln Center. They had been the second resident big band at Jazz Lincoln Center next to Wynton's orchestra from 2002 to 2007, but devoted to Afro-Latin music, Afro-Latin jazz. And I had been there doing my internship, so I had not met Arturo, but I knew of him and admired his music and the band. But they had left. They left to start their own nonprofit, the Afro-Latin Jazz Alliance. I went to see their very first show through my brother. And you know how there's an audience response card that falls out of your program, most people ignore? Well, I filled it out, and then I flipped it over and I wrote Arturo a note, and I said, "Hi, I'm Eric. I'm studying arts management in grad school here in the city. I interned at Jazz Lincoln Center when you all were there. I'm a great admirer. If you need any help with your nonprofit, let me know. And they were so mom and pop at that point that about 10 months later, I heard from Arturo's wife saying, "Oh my God, we just found your note. Would you want to meet with us and consider working with us?" And I was about to write my master's thesis, didn't have a lot of time, but I thought, man, I need to listen to this and I need to meet with them. So I went to their home and we realized very quickly we had a lot of work to do together. And there was no full-time staff, a very small board of directors. And I became Arturo's assistant director. It was really a glorified internship. And it was where I cut my teeth. I helped them produce their concerts at Symphony Space. Just so many memorable shows with Miguel Zanon and Donald Harrison. We did our 10th anniversary shows of the orchestra with so many beautiful artists and tributing Randy Weston and Bill Aguado and Bob Sancho, and just a really special time in my life. And the one thing that we got to do is we went to Cuba. And I had gone to Cuba for the first time with Arturo in 2009. And then in 2010, ultimately, he hired me back. I finished school, and he hired me back as his executive director. And my first gig was to take the Chico Farrell Afro-Cuban Jazz Orchestra, who had this residency at Birdland for many years, to Cuba, and to return Chico's orchestra to his homeland. And I was 24, scared out of my mind, thrown into the deep end immediately. And we somehow raised the money and brought this orchestra down to Havana and did this tour. And it was one of the most defining experiences of my life. I remember Larry Blumenfeld, the Wall Street Journal, and just an incredible writer, joined us. And I actually got to go to the house where my mom lived as a child on that trip, because we found out that in San Jose de las Lajas, where my mom's family was from, right outside of Havana in Havana province, Chico Farrell's family was from there as well, in Tapaste or nearby. So the Chico Farrell Orchestra played a gig in the town square, and then I walked a few hundred feet to my mom's house. And the serendipity of the universe putting me and Arturo together in our professional collaboration was unbelievable. And as I said, changed my life for the better. And ultimately, that experience was tremendous. I, for about 2.5 years, ran Arturo's nonprofit and oversaw all the performance, commissioning, education, touring activities. We slowly grew the staff, grew the organization. Ultimately, I was called back to Duke University by my mentor, Aaron Greenwald, at Duke Performances. And it felt like I had been thrown in the deep end. It was time for me to learn and sort of take a step back. So I was at Duke Performances, moved back to North Carolina, to Durham, for 8 years, where it was a second education for me. And Duke Performances had a deep tradition of presenting jazz music, incredible tradition of commissioning and developing new work by jazz artists, and major works from folks like Jason Moran, who developed his In My Mind commission on Monk's music, Thelonious Monk, as well as just a who's who, the Bad Plus. And we did a huge festival around women singers in jazz, including Cecile McLaurin-Salvant and Nina Freelon and Kate McGarry, and so many incredible artists who I admire. For Monk's centennial, we took over this warehouse space in downtown Durham called the Durham Fruit and Produce Company, and for 2 weeks did a Monk celebration that we partnered on with Ethan Iverson, the pianist formerly of the Bad Plus. So just tremendous experiences for me personally, learning how to be a jazz presenter, and to think about how do we take this incredible special music, and the thing that makes it so special is its intimacy. You can listen, you can be a foot away from the artist and just be so immersed in their expression and what they're saying. So we had a lot of fun. We played with about a dozen different venues on Duke's campus and in Durham. So we did everything from large concert halls to small intimate clubs that we would turn into small little venues and in these repurposed former warehouses and things like that. So just grateful for the years that I had back at Duke. One of my most memorable experiences was collaborating with Gerald Clayton, incredible pianist who, of course, has built such a beautiful career for himself. We commissioned him to do a piece on the Piedmont blues tradition, which came out of Durham and the Piedmont area of North Carolina and the South. And he did deep field work and worked with the elders of the Piedmont blues tradition, and then orchestrated it for about a 10-piece ensemble with video and live multimedia. Worked with a director named Christopher Macaron of the American Vicarious, and a project that has toured all over the country, which is just very special for me to know that Gerald was able to create that alongside us. The thing that I'm also proud of is I had the opportunity to teach at Duke for 3 years. I taught an arts management class to undergrads, and really my goal was to give them courage to pursue careers in the arts, to know that a career in the arts could be fulfilling, and that you could make some money, and you didn't have to necessarily go down a traditional path that you weren't really feeling. I'm all about pursuing things that you love, and I think with hard work and perseverance and daily commitment to our craft, we can build lives, professional lives for ourselves that we can be proud of. And for me, encouraging those students, and it was about 50 students I got to work with over those 3 years. They're all doing tremendous things right now. Some stayed in the arts, some didn't, but they're all making me proud. A lot have gone on to careers as musicians or arts administrators, music producers, you name it. So very proud of that experience. The other part of my life that I actually don't talk about a lot, but folks have come to know me by, is my work as a music producer, as a record producer. And it's really something that I fell into. I didn't know what music producing meant. But when I was interning with Arturo O'Farrell, he was about to do a sextet record that he was recording in Brooklyn at Peter Carl's studio. And he invited me to the session. He said, "Eric, I trust your ear. You're a musician. I trust your judgment. Go sit behind the glass next to the engineer and take notes, and just listen and make sure we're getting the takes that we need. Make sure we're in tune. Make sure that we're just capturing the vibe that we're after." And he generously credited me as an assistant producer on that record. And then I realized, oh my God, this is this creative outlet that I love, and being a partner to artists in the studio. And then I ultimately learned about the things that jazz producers do and music producers do, not just the creative part in the studio, but everything from the seed of an idea all the way to the release and beyond. I feel like records live forever, and I became a partner in fundraising, in picking repertoire, in choosing and building bands, thinking about strategy for the studio. Ultimately, my calling card became working on big band records, because Arturo had the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra, an 18-piece big band. So managing and producing sessions for big bands in the studio, which was, partly herding cats, but so much more gratifying than that. Just the relationships I built and have been fortunate to build with those artists. And did 6 records with Arturo, ranging from that first Risa Negra album on Zoho to 40 Acres and a Burro, which got nominated for a Grammy. And then we did Final Night at Birdland, the Chico Farrell Orchestra's final set at Birdland, which we recorded. And then the Noguchi Sessions, Arturo's solo piano record. And then fast forward to The Offense of the Drum, that the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra released in 2014. We're fortunate to earn a Grammy for that. And then Cuba, The Conversation Continues. So 2014, we took the Afro-Latin Jazz Orchestra to Cuba and had commissioned both Cuban and American composers to write for the band. So that was a beautiful journey for me. And I ultimately continued that work for the last 7 years now. Have worked with Daphnis Prieto, the Cuban composer, drummer, MacArthur Genius Fellow, and brilliant educator. And we've become dear friends and worked on 3 records together. And I've become Daphnis's chief artistic and producing collaborator. I helped him to put together his big band record, Back to the Sunset, which won a Grammy in 2019. And then during the pandemic, we released Transparency, his sextet record, which was nominated. And then we just put out this past September a record called Cantar, which means to sing. And it's in 3 languages, in English, Spanish, and Portuguese, a record of songs featuring the brilliant Brazilian singer Luciana Souza, just incredible interpreter, vocalist, and I co-produced that with Larry Klein. So producing has become a beautiful part of my craft. I'm currently working on another project, a duo record of songs with the South African vocalist Vuyo Satashe, who's an incredible singer, and the pianist, originally from Durham, North Carolina, but based here in New York, Chris Padishall. So excited to work on that with them and release that hopefully in the coming months and this next year, co-producing that with the guitarist Rafiq Bhatia. And I want to give a quick shout out to Harsha Murthy, who just is a dear friend and Duke alum who has been a mentor to me and has helped, worked as an executive producer with us on many of these recent projects with Daphne's. So I owe a lot to Harsha. I would say the last part of my spiel here is just my journey back to New York. So during the pandemic, my wife and I moved back to the city. We both work in the arts, and I landed at Harlem Stage, which is an institution that next year will celebrate 40 years. We used to be the organization that presented at Aaron Davis Hall. And then in 2006, we moved it to the Harlem Stage Gatehouse, which has a long tradition of presenting jazz music and music in general. We are a multidisciplinary presenter, so we do dance, theater, film, you name it. And I'm just thrilled to work as the managing director there alongside Pat Cruz, who's a legend in this field. I learn from Pat every day, and she's been with us for probably about 25 years now. So just so fortunate to have mentors like Pat, who I can learn from every day. And as I said, jazz has been a big part of our history, and we continue that through our commissioning program, Waterworks, as well as our monthly music series called Uptown Nights. And even in the last 2.5 years that I've been at Harlem Stage, just so many incredible projects that I've been fortunate to be a part of. Craig Harris and Marshall Allen in a tribute to Sun Ra, the Nocturnal Nubian Ball. We actually did a film. We recorded that for a film, which we'll present soon at the Harlem International Film Festival next month. And then just presenting dear friends and colleagues who I admire, like Pedrito Martinez, Vijay Iyer, Carla Cook, Lakeisha Benjamin. Shout out to Gail Boyd. Lakeisha's manager just had a tremendous show. We partnered with Carnegie Hall Citywide on that show last month before Lakeisha went off to Europe. Just please check out her record Phoenix. It's tremendous. And yeah, just so fortunate to be at Harlem Stage and to work with such a talented team. And what can I say? Jazz music, this music, it gives so much to me. I'll never forget going to Dizzy's Club back in the day, and Todd Barkin, who I was fortunate to work on a record with as a co-producer. He used to say on the mic, and I'm sure a lot of you know this, he'd say, take care of the music and the music will take care of you. And I'm not sure if that's Todd's or if he heard that from someone else, but regardless, I feel like that is true. And I feel like working in this field is, in a way, a higher calling. It's spiritual, it's artistic, it's emotional. As I said, I feel like I'm an advocate and a partner and, frankly, a friend to the artists who just need to be heard. They have this incredible talent, and giving them a platform to share their music, to share their craft, to do it in interesting and intimate and large settings, and to record it and to document it so that for years to come, folks will know this work. And again, fortunate to work in all these different capacities. I do, if you're interested in learning more, I know we're just about out of time, but I do have a website, ericoberstein.com, where you can look at my projects and some videos of my work and collaborations. And also I want to plug harlemstage.org. Please check us out. We've got our Black Arts Movement Examine series, which is wrapping up next month with a 3-day conference and a culminating set of shows, both at Harlem Stage and Park Avenue Armory. And then I also want to plug Daphne's website, daphnesonmusic.com. where you can learn more about Daphnis's projects and teaching and work. So just thank you all for the time. I know I can't see you or hear you. I see some comments in the chat. Thank you, Rome Neal. I've heard so much about you. I hope to meet you soon. And anyone else who's watching, I hope you've enjoyed it. So thank you, Gail. And I think I'm at time, so I'm gonna call it quits here. Thanks, everyone. Nice to see you.